a really common mistake, and we see this in the research, they call it commitment bias. And that's where
Oh,
people
yes.
commit to someone. And then what happens is once you're committed, you're a lot more likely to overlook, some of these red flags. You're a lot more likely to be mistreated in relationships because you've already kind of invested. It's like an economic principle, right? It's like you opportunity costs. You want to cut your losses, but some people, when you're already invested, you're like, oh, this is so much harder to pull out, even if it's a declining investment, right? So it's the same thing in relationships. So the longer you can kind of wait for that commitment and wait for that emotional investment, the more you're going to gather all the information. It doesn't mean that, they have to be perfect, and that sometimes people, especially if you're more avoidantly attached, you kind of lean the other way where you're like, you don't want to emotionally connect at all because you're looking for things wrong with them. But it's just about kind of having as much information as you really need at that point in time to move forward with a commitment. And that's what I really say, kind of moving into date 7 and 8, that you can focus on kind of getting the awareness around some of these really core pieces of someone's life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Love. I'm your host, Robin Ducharme, and today we're going to be joined by a friend of mine that I met last year in California, and her name is Christie Kederian. Dr. Christie, the date doctor. We're having you on again, and I'm so happy to talk to you about your new book, and welcome, Christie.
Thank you so much for having me, Robin. It's always such a pleasure to be here.
We love you, and we loved your new book. It's called 10 Dates to Your Soulmate. So before we go into that, Dr. Christie, why don't you tell us about yourself? And then we're going to talk about why you wrote this awesome book, because it's very different than a lot of dating books that I've read before. So it's exciting.
I love hearing that from you, especially because I feel like you're very well read. So yeah, a little bit about me. I really found my passion in just being so curious about love and relationships from a really early age. Kind of attribute that to my background. I'm an Armenian, and a really big part of our culture is just really centered on relationships and family and kind of that unit. And also my faith background as a Christian, just really centered in being like your relationship with God and others. And so I've always been so fascinated by relationships. And so when I was going to studying, I studied psychology, and I kind of found my niche and clicked when I took a course in marriage and family therapy. And I just thought, oh, this makes so much sense that our closest relationships or romantic relationships really kind of impact who we are and kind of what happens in our life satisfaction, all of that. So I did some research in college, kind of fell in love with the field, became a marriage and family therapist. And then throughout my journey, I was working with a lot of couples in my work, and a lot of couples that, were doing well. It's usually when they come into the therapy office. And I was fascinated by what drew two people together and what made those relationships work. And there was an opportunity to work at eHarmony with the founder of eHarmony, Dr. Neil Clark Warren, who is a psychologist from my hometown, Pasadena. And he really was one of the founding fathers of the dating app world and developed this algorithm that with the purpose of trying to reduce the divorce rate. And so my work there with researching as well as kind of working in their matchmaking department, we worked with people, high profile people, celebrities, kind of people that didn't necessarily want to just use the dating app. They wanted kind of that higher touch approach. So I learned so much about kind of how modern dating works, these algorithms, how we're kind of combining and integrating, the inner work, kind of what we need to do to prepare ourselves for a relationship. And now the new way of how people are actually meeting and what relationships are actually like now in this modern age. And so that started my whole route into matchmaking, worked with eHarmony and other dating sites, and then started my own company, just really helping empower people to understand that intersection of kind of the inner soul work, as I call it, and the strategy that is really required to make sure that you're attracting the type of relationship that you want.
Right. Yeah. And so you've spent, what is it, Christie? Like the last 2 years writing your book, and now you're doing your book launch. And it's different. Your book is very different than other dating books because, you do talk about online dating a little bit. You talk, a little bit about how to meet people that you want to date. But really the meat of the book is dating with intention from the first date to the 10th date. And hopefully over that time, you're learning about yourself in this relationship that, could be starting. And of course, asking the right questions and and having the right dates and the scenarios so that you're getting to know somebody on those deeper levels, which is so important, right?
Exactly.
So it's about going from date 1 to date 10 and the progression of that. So I just thought that was like, it's so unique. It's very different than other dating books. So Christie, tell us about the evolution of that and why, and really the purpose of the book for the reader.
Yeah. So when I first decided, I wanted to kind of have my work be encapsulated in a way that, the masses could tap into, because we work with just like a small group of people in our group and individual programs. I have like a, kind of curriculum and something that I teach all my clients. But when you break that down, it kind of breaks down into what I call like the inner work, kind of the mindset piece, then the strategy. So that's kind of utilizing the technologies or learning how to meet people without the apps. And the third part is this, part of the program, which is the meet section. That's what, 10 Dates to Your Soulmate really breaks down. And what I found is a lot of times people think that when you just meet the right person, then the relationship will just magically appear that you want. And the reason that you're not getting there is because you haven't met the right person. I always say, and a lot of people have asked me, oh, you have soulmate in the title of your book. Like, do you believe in soulmates? And I believe that soulmates aren't found, they're really created. So it's really about finding the person that you feel like, hey, I want to create this relationship that I desire with this person. So you're kind of like, you have the ingredients, but you're trying to integrate your lives to make that recipe or whatever you're looking for. So I really decided to focus this book on that process of how do you really know if someone is the right person for you? And how do you know that someone's not the right person for you? And sometimes what I found is that a roadblock many people get into is they assume they know, like they have a gut feeling about someone.
Exactly.
In the book, the statistic that it takes an average 19 minutes on a first date for someone to decide, I want to be with this person or not. And some people might think that's a long time. Some people might think that's a short time, but it's really, we're not giving people a lot of a chance to understand more about them. And people kind of think, oh, there was no chemistry. And if you tell your friends, oh, there's no chemistry, they'll say, of course, move on, you deserve better, don't settle. But maybe they're not looking underneath the surface and understanding, hey, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about who's actually a good fit for me and how to really understand if someone is or isn't.
I love all of that you just said, because I think it rings true for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. We're just so stuck on, like, when I know, it's the chemistry piece. Mm-hmm. And you say, like, over and over in the book, it's like you have to go beyond the first date. Mm-hmm. Unless it's like absolutely red flags, definitely not. There's just not a chance because, there's some hard and fast, definitely not. Mm-hmm. But you're saying, for the most part, you're going to say yes to a second date, mm-hmm. or you're going to want to ask for a second date. Right, Christie?
Yeah, exactly. So the way that I really recommend people approach the dating process is trying to figure out as much as you can before you actually go on a first date. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to meet someone and let's just see what happens. But statistically, your chances aren't really great if you're looking for a long-term relationship and you're just going to a bar meeting someone. I think it's like less than 8% of people find a long-term relationship at a bar. So ideally, what you want to do, whether you're being connected through friends or on a dating app, is figure out kind of what those top qualities are that you're looking for and get those out of the way before you're on a first date. I find, especially with a lot of women, that they show up to the first date with their kind of laundry list of questions in their head. Like, okay, how am I going to ask this guy if he, has financial stability and if he, wants kids? And what happens is that really kills any type of chemistry when you're just like,
interviewing
someone.
Oh, totally. Right.
So it's really about showing up on the first date and already knowing some of the main things and just kind of seeing how you feel around a person and connecting with them on that personal level. And, there's plenty of time to dig deeper about their past relationships and all those things. And I kind of break that down more specifically in the book on like which date you should delve into that. But I think really on the first date, you want to make sure that you connect with them, that they're a kind person. There's no blaring red flags there. And then the second date is when you kind of continue getting to know if they're, your person.
Right. And throughout the book, you have really good examples of clients you worked with and how when I was reading this, I'm like, I heard that one. Oh, been there, done that. Like you just like, I love the examples because there's like a lot that we can all relate to. So you've got a client, Liz, who like, so there's people that just don't get up beyond the first date, right? I think this is, you're seeing this in your practice.
Yes.
So Liz was acting, so she wasn't feeling the chemistry on the first date, which I think is common, that people are like looking for the sparks, the fireworks, like, and so maybe she didn't realize, but she was acting quite uninterested pretty soon on in the first date, right?
Yeah.
And so you're asking for feedback after, and she's like, well, I think he was okay. Like maybe I would entertain a second date. And he was like going like, no, like, she was clearly giving me the signs that she wasn't into me.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So you were able to actually bring that awareness to your client and be like, all right, like let's get him beyond the just for the chemistry piece.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened with Liz was specifically she fell into this category that I talk about in the book, which is like the one and done dater. And what one and done daters don't often understand is that they feel like, I know myself really well. I can just go in here, check off the boxes and be out of here, by the time to make happy hour with my friends. But what they didn't realize is that she was actually self-sabotaging the chemistry she didn't feel, because chemistry is really a dynamic. You have to show up, as your best self, wanting to connect, not in this like judgmental, like interviewer, should I give this guy the job or not? Because he felt that in their situation, John really felt that from her, and he wasn't able to be his best self because he felt like, I'm getting questioned and judged.
Exactly.
So the chemistry didn't
it's like
show up.
It's like, are you both giving your full selves to that interaction, right? Are you being present? And she wasn't. So of course he's going to shut down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So it is self-sabotage. That's a really good point. Okay. So you're always like pretty much saying, okay, just go to the second date. So the first date is about I feel good. I feel at ease. I can be myself. Good conversation. Like, so you're paying attention to how are you feeling with this new person, this stranger that I just met for the first time. And if it's like, okay, feeling good, feeling like, okay, that wasn't bad. It wasn't right. Okay. And then you definitely want to go for the second date, right, Christy?
Yeah.
So what is the goal of the second date?
So the second date's really about kind of spending a little bit more time with them, kind of digging deeper. So some examples I give at the end of the chapters of like the type of date to go on. So the first date, I really say, shouldn't be too long. Sometimes people think I'm having a great time. I should spend 5 hours with this person. And the reality is you really need momentum in the dating process, and that will just kill momentum right away. It's great if they show up amazing on the first date, but I want to see them on the 7th date and the 8th date. And so it's good not to fully invest everything in that first date. It's just like a shorter date. The second date can be a little bit longer. You can say yes to a dinner because like, okay, there's something here and now we're going to explore it deeper. And that's where we're getting to know a little bit more about them. If you want to know, if they were married before, certain things like that. But we're also learning and sharing what I call like the elevator pitch speech. So it's not like we're diving deep into our whole past and our divorce and this and that. We're talking about like all these things the whole time, because that can also really kill chemistry. But you can give like a little elevator pitch of, I was married before, it didn't work out. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm looking for moving forward. And if they have more questions, you can politely say, I'm so happy to share more if we continue getting to know each other. But this is where you might be digging a little bit deeper and just seeing if there's more of that deeper connection that goes beyond just like the surface.
Yeah. I like the idea of a first date being very short. I know when like I was working as a matchmaker and dating coach, and even in my own experience before I met Hector, I was like, okay, my first date, like a walk, 1 hour walk max.
Love
right?
that.
And it's like, and I would say, like, I remember this because actually I did have work to do after my date with Hector.
Yeah.
And so I said to him before we walked, I was like, and even before we met, I said, I've got an hour to walk. And while we were walking, I said, like, if you've got a watch on, because I didn't bring my phone or anything. I was just like, if you've got a watch on, could you just check 30-minute mark and then we'll turn around. Like, I was like and that's
nice.
not rude. I mean, and we could have stood there and talked a lot longer. But I was like, I'm on the 1 hour rule within myself.
Mm-hmm.
And if this goes well, it's like, we'll book a second date.
Yeah.
I think it's like, there's not a big obligation. You've not committed a whole bunch of time. I was looking pretty, but I wasn't like dressed up for a fancy dinner.
Yeah.
So I just think that gives you a little bit more peace too, that you have, over invested in somebody you don't really know.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's what really creates a lot of discouragement for people in the dating process, is that they overinvest too quickly. They kind of already, I'm with this person in my mind and I'm planning our futures. And it's like, we have to slow down the process.
Yeah. So you say that dating should be more about observation than it is about expectation. I love that.
Yeah.
So tell us, because this is what you're seeing a lot of, right? People are coming in with these huge expectations of what. So tell us about that, Christie, and how do you help people recognize, the dating process is way more about like observing somebody else, observing yourself, how do you coach people in that?
Yeah. So the thing that I always say is that when you show up to a date in the dating process with someone, you don't want to give them a playbook. And a lot of times I see, especially women in our work, do that. So they show up, to the first or second date, and they already kind of place expectations on this person as if we're already in a relationship. So it's like, I want them to text me at this time, and I want this and that, and I want them to pick me up for dinner. It's like all of these things that we tell them that we want, or somehow communicate that we are interested in. And when you give someone the playbook, they can easily just do what you want them to do, but you don't actually know if that's truly their character or truly who they are or what they would do naturally. So remove the expectations from the dating process before you're in that committed relationship where it's like, yeah, we are going to meet each other's needs and focus on each other's desires and priorities. At this point, we just really want to observe how they are in what I say their natural habitat. So I really say to focus on that kind of on from dates 3 to 5 and see someone in a context situation instead of just talking to them across the dinner table and hearing, from the horse's mouth who they are. We have to learn about who they are as they interact with the world around them.
Like how they're behaving. I love this example you give of your client, Lindsay. Okay. So she and the man that she was dating had, I think, 2 or 3 dates, right? And they were long dates, like restaurant dates.
Yes.
And she said, like, okay, you asked her, well, how long was your second date? And she was like, I think it was 4 hours, right? You're like, well, that is a very long time for conversation. And she's like, well, we ran out of things. Like, I just don't know where this is going, because she's like, we ran out of things to say. And you're like, well, it only makes sense. Like, you were spending 4 hours, like 3 hours on the first date, 4 hours on the second date. Totally. And it's like, there's only so much. Like, like I think I'm a pretty good conversationalist, but to sit down and talk to somebody, like you're trying to think of new things and you're like, okay, I don't think he's the one. Yeah. But I really like this because you're like, okay, I think what you need to do is have a context date. Oh, and the other question you asked her, Christie, I love it. You were like, okay, well, what actually are you, like, let's get to exactly what you're looking for and what you value in a partner. And, she says trust, honesty, vulnerability, generosity, for instance. And you're like, how are you supposed to tell that person embodies those values? Yeah. Through conversation. Right. It's pretty hard. Really good point, though. Really, like, I didn't think about it that way. And then I was like, that is so true. Like, somebody has to show you with their actions that they have these traits. Right. Exactly. So you have to do a date. Like, so tell us about a context date, like, that you had recommended. And then, because I think and then he showed his true color. He showed a lot more of those just in the behavior, right? Yeah. Exactly. So I think a lot of times, like with Lindsay, people come in with that kind of intangible list when I ask them what they're looking for. And all of those things are so important and great qualities for a relationship, but there's really no way to find those out from that person. Like, you can't say, are you loyal? Like, yes. Are you trustworthy? Well, yeah, of course I'm loyal. Yeah. So, and that's where a lot of people, especially that have attracted people that are emotionally unavailable or, quote unquote narcissists or love bombing them, like they've just kind of trusted what somebody says about them rather than taking that step back and observing them in their environment. In Lindsay's situation with Jake, what happened was that she felt like he was a nice guy, but she kind of felt like that conversation was like dying out. So what I recommended was to do some sort of context activity. And for him, he really enjoyed rock climbing. He was like in his element. So they went indoor rock climbing, and she was able to see so many different sides of him, his sense of humor, a lot of the things that she was looking for
through kind of doing some activity together. She saw his generosity. She saw him helping out, just like all of these different things that there's no way she could have seen in conversation. And she's built that chemistry so quickly just from spending, a few hours doing an activity. There's research that supports this too. If you're like, this is a really nice guy or person, but I just don't know if they are for me, go on an activity day and just see them in a different environment or element. And that might really change what your perception of them is.
I really like that. So you talk about red flags, looking closely for red flags. Like you said, love bombing, right? By date, like I think it would like date 6, you could. So this is like what you were saying before, right? Is around all the words, all the, the texting and like it's everything's so eloquent and it's all going great. But when the rubber hits the road, like, do you actually know this person and how they behave with other people? Like how do you like how are you helping clients step back and understand if love bombing is happening and how they actually figure out, is it love bombing? Like in a situational or context date.
Yeah. And the thing about our process too is like typically people don't really make it to the 6th or 7th date if they're love bombing because the steam runs out. And if you're able to kind of do the context conversation, plan it that way, that you're not spending, 5 to 10 hours emotionally investing and connecting with them on the second date, then it pretty much wears out and you're able to see from a bird's eye view instead of just being so emotionally attached already that you're getting, you're not able to see the potential red flags. But generally, I recommend kind of by that 5th to 7th date that you're combining a context and conversation date. So you're spending a little bit more time with the person. And within there, some of the strategies I recommend, one is like a situational conversation. That could be something that when you're, going somewhere, like in a context, like one example is kind of beliefs about money. And the example I gave in the book is like, let's say you're walking around a farmer's market and you like want to buy this candle and it's like $40 and you say, I want to buy this candle, and you watch what their reaction is. Like, $40 on a candle, like, are you insane? Or like, oh, that's great, or so generous, I'm going to buy one for my sister. Like, you kind of see their reaction in that situation. Another example with the generosity piece that I shared was, sharing maybe a time that someone was extremely generous with you. Like the example that I gave was like, oh, this person kind of loaned me money and my family to buy a house, and seeing kind of what their response is. Oh, that's a really dumb financial decision. I would never do that. Or, oh, that's actually so generous. Like, how inspiring. So you can kind of see from someone's reactions, like where their actual values are without kind of having that direct question. So it's like in these conversations, you can understand a little bit more about their perspective as well. And another piece in the red flag conversation that I think is valuable is seeing someone in the context of their relationships with family and friends, either their own or yours.
Yes.
I think sometimes people wonder, when's the right time to do this? And I think around date 6 or 7, maybe even 8 is a good time because you've already established that you're like this person. So you're not leaning too far on that support system to tell you like, hey, should I like this person or not? Like, you've already kind of done that inventory yourself. But then you're also opening up to their perspective, people that really love you, before you have entered that commitment and not seen some of the red flags that can come up. So I think that that's a good time to do that as well.
I think so too. So you have an acronym, which I really like. It's EIBA, emotionally invested before aware. So people are, it's so, I just think this is like so common, right? That people are just like jumping in after, 2-3 dates with somebody. And it's like, they're in, like, I'm completely like, this person's the one, like we're moving forward. They're emotionally invested. And it takes away like your awareness. Like, you're just clouded by all this, all the chemistry and whatever you're feeling. But this is what you're inviting people to do over and over again, is like, take this slow. You're getting to know us. Like, this person was a perfect stranger until weeks ago, or even, right?
Yes.
And it's like, we actually really need to be more aware and more careful about that.
Yeah.
Right? 100%. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just think like this is what we need to talk more about, is actually stepping back and understanding your worth. And it's like, this person, they're going to have to earn my trust and my emotional investment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. A really common mistake, and we see this in the research, they call it commitment bias. And that's where
Oh,
people
yes.
commit to someone. And then what happens is once you're committed, you're a lot more likely to overlook, some of these red flags. You're a lot more likely to be mistreated in relationships because you've already kind of invested. It's like an economic principle, right? It's like you opportunity costs. You want to cut your losses, but some people, when you're already invested, you're like, oh, this is so much harder to pull out, even if it's a declining investment, right? So it's the same thing in relationships. So the longer you can kind of wait for that commitment and wait for that emotional investment, the more you're going to gather all the information. It doesn't mean that they have to be perfect, and that sometimes people, especially if you're more avoidantly attached, you kind of lean the other way where you're like, you don't want to emotionally connect at all because you're looking for things wrong with them. But it's just about kind of having as much information as you really need at that point in time to move forward with a commitment. And that's what I really say, kind of moving into date 7 and 8, that you can focus on kind of getting the awareness around some of these really core pieces of someone's life that usually, especially when I was doing couples therapy, I would find sometimes people would be engaged or married without even having some of these conversations. And I think that this is kind of the time where you're like considering that first commitment, that you can really delve deeper into these areas so you can have an awareness of what a relationship with this person will be like.
I think you make a really good point, and I wanted to ask you about that, Christie, around when you were working as a therapist and you were doing premarital counseling, right, with people.
Yeah.
Which I think is awesome. I don't think a lot of people do that. I mean, I know it's something that a lot of, for instance, if you're Catholic, a lot of, you have to do it. Like it's part of, if you want to get married in the Catholic Church, you have to do premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Which I think premarital counseling is so important and good. Like I didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
But tell us about that. Like you said, it's like these people have promised themselves they've made a commitment to get married. But what kind of questions did they not ask each other? Like, can we? Yeah, like you're which is what you're saying. Like even by date 6 to 7, date 8, more dates you're on, you want to get to know somebody on the deeper level each time.
Yeah. So the first area is what I call kind of like vision and values. So really getting a clear picture of what this person's vision for their future is, their ideal future. Obviously, life doesn't always turn out as we plan, but you really can learn a lot about someone's values with what they envision for their future. So, let's say they want to be a digital nomad and travel the world for the next 3 years, and you have a dental practice and you can't leave.
Right. You're like, well, the good thing you told me on date 6, but that's not going to happen for me.
Exactly. So those futures don't align no matter how much chemistry you have with someone.
No matter what.
Big, I work with a lot of people that are in kind of that age of, do I want kids? Do I not want kids? And the most painful relationships that didn't work out are the ones where maybe you kind of enter the relationship where one person really wanted kids and the other person was undecided, and then they ended up on different sides of that decision. And that can be very painful because either way, someone kind of chooses a future that they didn't envision for themselves if they decide to stay together. Those types of conversations, I think, are really important before you commit to someone, being on the same page with those key things that you envision for your own future and those values that really dictate who you are and how you live. The second area is really learning a lot more about their own like mental health and wellness, any history there. And I think people don't have this conversation enough, though an alarming percentage of Americans struggle with, at the very least, anxiety, depression, people all around the world. So really understanding what that is, what their struggle is, and what their like prevention plan is. So let's say they, maybe know that they struggle with this or at times do. What do they do when they're struggling? Like, what is their plan? Like, how do they take care of themselves? These are questions that, people don't often ask, but they really need to know the answer to, because if you're going to partner with someone in life, there's going to be ups and downs. And if they have that history of mental health, addiction, whatever that is, we have to kind of know how we can support someone, but make sure that they're able to support themselves on their own as well. The third area is family dynamics. So a lot of people don't really ask this question because they're like, oh, well, I don't really need to know about that. And then I would see, in premarital counseling, all of a sudden it was like this huge thing, like their parents or this or that, or, they're really helping their parents out with this thing and it's really affecting their actual relationship, or they're estranged from their family and there's resentment because you're really close to your family, but as a therapist, really working with people's childhood and family of origin, whether your family's in the picture or not, they are very much present in how you, operate in your own relationship. So you really need to know what's going on there. And no family's perfect. So there's always going to be some kind of baggage, but you have to have the awareness of what you're getting yourself into and figure out, is this the right baggage for me? And then the last area is past relationships, really understanding kind of what dynamics didn't work out, what personal responsibility they take, rather than just saying, oh, all my exes are crazy. Like, what part of that role did they not play? Maybe because it's always about the dynamic, and figuring out, what role they play currently. If someone has kids and co-parents, like what do those dynamics look like?
Exactly. And I love the fact that in the book, for each date, you do have like good questions like that you can ask, and it's with consideration, and there's an approach. Like, it's not just like, all right, let's sit down and ask each other these 6 questions. Like, no, it's like, there's a way to do this, right? Like, you give the example around this one woman that was dating a man who had a history of depression. And like you said, like, mental health is something that we need to talk about. And it's like the stigma, thank goodness we're getting there, but it's still there. But the fact that she was still concerned, like by date, whatever it was, like, let's say date 8 or 9, and things were going great, but she did have the back of her head this concern. And it's very important that you talk about that concern.
Yeah.
And you can do it very lovingly, and because you want to know, this is very important, how will he deal in the future? If something bad happens, and if he slips back into depression, like, what has he done in the past? Because this inevitably will affect not only him, but your relationship. It makes sense, right? So it doesn't serve anybody not to have these discussions.
100%. Yeah. And I think that the thing that people don't often think about when they're like, okay, should I talk about this or not, is that it can actually reduce a lot of the shame for them as well, or the fear for them as well, especially. And if you're someone who, struggles and you're like, how do I approach this conversation? I think it can be so powerful and healing to have someone really meet you in that and say, hey, like, I'll be with you. I'll, help support you in that as well, rather than them kind of hiding it and then it coming out in different ways. And you're like, oh, I feel helpless. I don't know how to help. Like, having these conversations before it becomes a potential problem in your relationship.
Right. And the example with the man with depression, I mean, your client thought, okay, this could very well be a red flag, right? But his response was, this is what I did. I got help. I'm actively working with a counselor, and just know that I am committed to my mental, my well-being. And that gave her a lot of peace, because she was like, okay, like, that's really good for me for him. When stuff does happen, because it's going to in life, stuff happens. He's gonna be, proactive with his care.
Yes,
she could support him in that.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, the number one thing to look for in someone is their commitment to growth, and if they're going to work on themselves, because you could find someone like that who, struggles with their mental health, or you can find someone who appears to be perfect. I would choose the growth person 100 times.
Me too.
Because life is going to happen. People develop issues later on. And if they're not willing to kind of look at themselves and be committed to that growth at this point, then you don't want to see them when, life happens.
You're absolutely right. So in the book, you talk about commitment, right? And when are you going to have this, when to have the conversation, how to have the conversation. I also, like you said, if people ask you, do labels matter? And you're like, there's emphatic yes, labels matter. And I agree, right? Otherwise you're going to end up with a situationship. So tell me about that, Christie.
Yeah, people ask me that question all the time. And sometimes people will come to me, then they're like, oh, I've been kind of dating this person for 6 months to a year, and I don't know where we stand. And, I'm anxious. I'm like, of course you're anxious, because in relationships, we need that definition to feel secure. We want to build that secure attachment with someone. And how can we do that if we don't know exactly where we stand and exactly where we fit into, their vision for the future as well as ours? So I really believe that you do have to kind of define what the relationship is. And typically, kind of, if you're following our process, generally that's around like the 2.5 to 3 month mark. If you're looking for that type of long-term relationship or marriage or whatever. Obviously, if you're not, then, do what you want to do. But if you do want to do that, then I think that this is the time to kind of realize, okay, anything after this point is just going to be kind of acting as if we're in a relationship, but not having the label
but not
on it.
defined, right? Because you could be dating
Exactly.
somebody for, like you said, 5-6 months. That
Mhm.
person's going, I'm having a great time.
Yeah.
I have no
Mhm.
intention of staying with this person, but the other
Exactly.
person doesn't know that.
Yeah. And if you're progressing with relationships in this way, a lot of people say, well, I've been dating someone for 6 months, but I don't even know, what they want in the future. Well, of course, then it's not going to feel like there's as much depth as someone that you've only gone on 10 dates with, but you really explored and understood so much more of their character. And there's been a progression of connection rather than just kind of staying at the surface level and, oh, all we do is kind of go out and have a good time and that's it, So I think that there is that conversation of like, you can go on 10 dates, but if they're all the same date and you're not really deepening that connection, then yeah, it's not going to feel like you're ready for a relationship. But if you go on these dates 10 or, you have to be so specific to that number, but if you go on dates and you feel like there's that progression of connection, feel like you know enough about them to kind of then step into that commitment with someone, then we transition into, okay, this goes from observing and goes more into, okay, I'd like to commit to this person and connect in a way that we're committed to meeting each other's needs and desires and forming that relationship.
So you give an example of a client you're working with who they've been dating for a while, and it was like time for that conversation just to define the relationship, to say like, are we both ready to commit? We both want this? And I think it was it was either the man or woman, I can't remember, but they were like, actually not yet. Like I still have some concerns or things that I need clarity on. And I know that would hurt to hear for, it would sting a little bit, like, but it's really good that you want to get this stuff, out in the open. And one of the things was the family dynamics piece, wasn't it? Christie?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Just asking for more answers and more clarity around the relationship that this person had with their family.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like when you invite that conversation, then you're able to have that authenticity like they did in the book, because that person, might feel like, oh, I can never kind of broach this topic. But because there is that invitation of like, hey, I'd like to like take this to the next stage, like, what would that require? For me, I feel like comfortable doing that. Like, what does that require on your end? It's not a rejection per se. It's not that they don't want that, but it's really about understanding, okay, like this is kind of what I would need to feel comfortable moving forward, and seeing if that person can meet you there, or if more conversations or more time need to kind of unfold for them to feel safe enough to kind of move forward into that. What you want to pay attention to is if they don't really have a reason. If they say, I'm not really ready, but I don't know why, that could be kind of an indication that they're afraid of commitment, or they kind of have that pattern of like, yeah, they don't want to put a label on something. And so that's a really good thing to know at this point, rather than, what I see a lot of times is that they just kind of keep getting strung along and never kind of have that commitment that they're looking for. And that will easily breed resentment into a relationship and can really affect a healthy dynamic.
I think so too. And my partner and I have always had this. It's almost like this, we're checking in on each other. We're checking, how are you, like, we've been together for it's 11 months. And it's like, it's not like we're checking in like, oh, like, are you doing this? It's more just like, I love you, are like, so grateful for you. Like we're giving each other reassurance. And I think when you're dating, I mean, what I would give the advice, which is what I think I followed, was like, are we on the same page? Are you good? Like, do you like, are we having do you want to have another more time together? I'm really enjoying this. And if you're getting that positive feedback, you're both moving in the same direction.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
Maybe sometimes it's like, if you're having this conversation, like date 10, date 11, which is 3 months in, maybe, it's like, why wouldn't you be more honest in the beginning? Right, Christie? What do you think?
Yeah, I think like ideally you're not getting to that 10th day and you're like blindsided, because you are having some of those deeper conversations and connections, and having that positive feedback, I mean, feels good for anyone. I think that that's a great way to indicate that someone's interested in your emotional world, how you're feeling in the process, and not kind of just avoiding some of those conversations till, the end, or till things work out or don't work out. And it shows that someone's really emotionally aware, I think, to be able to kind of ask that. They have that emotional intelligence to like respond like, oh, I'm enjoying this, or you, and like checking in, I think is really important in every relationship.
Yeah. Okay. So there was, I wanted to talk about online dating before we close, because there was some interesting research that I read from you around women. There is more success in online dating with women messaging men first.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, please? Because I thought, because you're on top of like what's happening in the online dating world. And I think there's still rules that people like to follow around the man should be the one reaching out first, or setting up the first date, or all these things. And it's just like, the world's changing, people. Like, we have to be more open here. But tell us about the research around that.
Yeah, that research is really interesting. And I share it with my female clients all the time, because I think people, especially with the dating apps, like we don't really know what the first move is or who's making the first move first. Yeah. And so a lot of female clients I have will either avoid sending the first message because they think, oh, the person should, send that message. The person should, or they get stuck in this kind of pen pal dynamic where they're just texting, waiting for the guy to make the move and ask you out, but we're investing and wasting all of our time just talking to someone and not actually going on a date. So I always frame it to women in that sense of like, okay, would you rather just like figure out if this person wants to go on a date or not? Or would you rather like waste your time? And kind of from a value perspective, it shows a lot more value of yourself and self-worth to say, no, you know what? I really respect my time and I just kind of want to see if this person's interested in going on a date, rather than just going along with whatever pen pal situation and conversation for weeks because, well, I'm going to follow the rule and not ask them out first. So I think like ideally, and, I share a lot of strategy on this on my page and with my clients, but ideally you're having like a shorter, conversation back and forth, just making sure they have that kind of emotional, social intelligence to ask you questions back and forth. And you're getting to know kind of if they meet your main criteria. And then you're transitioning to going on a date. So an easy thing I recommend having clients say is, I'm not going to be checking the app that much this weekend, but if you're free, I'm up for a quick, FaceTime hello on this day or this day. So it's like, hey, like we're transitioning and I'm ready to kind of connect in a different, deeper way. If you feel like you want to ascribe to more traditional viewpoints, then I would say you can let him make the first move of like asking out on an actual date after the FaceTime. But getting through that dating app kind of limbo is really important to make sure you're actually meeting with people and not getting stuck in the process.
Yes, exactly. But what this research was telling me as well is men do appreciate a woman that's going to start the conversation.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And maybe they're just being more shy. Is that what it is, you think, Christie?
Yeah, I mean, talking to a lot of my male clients, I think like the reality is that they're pretty fatigued from dating apps as well. They also are the ones that are constantly getting like actually rejected, whereas women more so have what we call perceived rejection, where they think they're getting rejected because someone's not swiping on them. But men are actually kind of, if they're given that responsibility of them always have to be asking someone out,
then they are getting more rejected. That makes sense.
I think that they're really tired, honestly, as well. So I think that having more of a egalitarian approach to it can be really helpful, and they might appreciate, that positive affirmation of like, this girl's reaching out and she's interested, and I don't have to do all of the work just to prove that, I'm interested.
Yeah. Well, this has been like so awesome, and you're always so full of wisdom and ways that we can like help people find their person, right? And it's you could be happy with many different people. I mean, your book is called 10 Dates to Your Soulmate, and I really like how you emphasize what you said before is like you build your soulmate relationship. It's not you can have different soulmates in this lifetime. So
exactly.
Yeah. And you found your soulmates, which is beautiful. After being a bridesmaid 22 times. I just love it, Christie. So tell us about your website and your course that you offer, and of course your book. I hope everybody reads your book after listening to this, because there's so many great questions and a great way to get to know somebody over time. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate that feedback. But you can connect with me on my website, therapyfordating.com. We have a lot of information about ways to work with me, both in the coaching realm. So if you need just kind of like some individual or group support, we have that. We have courses that come out, as well as matchmaking services. So you can find all that information on on my website. And then the book, 10 Days to Your Soulmate, you can order anywhere books are sold. And yeah, I'm really excited for this to be kind of out there in the world.
Of course it is. It's your new baby.
Yes.
You should be very proud. It's an excellent book. So
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christie Kederian. I'm going to close with a blessing. We do this every podcast, and it's really with your words and your wisdom. So may we learn what we can about a person, eyes wide open. We want to have grace for someone else's flaws and imperfections without playing Russian roulette with the most important decision of our lives. May we know we are designed for relationships, connection, and intimacy. And though there are different ways to arrive at the intended destination, as long as we have curiosity, clarity, and awareness, we can create the relationship we desire. And may we remember, I really like this, if it's meant to be, it will find a way. Indeed, nothing good gets away. I believe that. Yeah. I believe that there's a plan for all of us, and nothing good that's for you will go beyond you.
Yes, I agree too.
You have to be in a place of receiving, and I think that I'm learning that in my life, and it's made all the difference.
Yes, so true. I love that.
Thank you, Dr. Christie Kederian.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Let's Talk Love is brought to you by Real Love Ready and hosted by Robin Ducharme. If you'd like to keep learning with us, visit realloveready.com for more resources and tools to boost your relational skills and get better at love. If this podcast has resonated with you, it would mean the world to us if you could take just 30 seconds to do these 3 things. Follow or subscribe. Never miss an episode by hitting the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite app. This makes sure new episodes show up automatically for you, and it helps us get more visibility so more people can find our show. Leave a rating and review. Your feedback means everything to us. By leaving a 5-star rating and a thoughtful review, you're not only showing your support, but also helping others discover the podcast. Share an episode that really spoke to you with someone in your life, whether it's a friend, partner, or family member. Your recommendation could just be what they need to hear. We at Real Love Ready acknowledge and express gratitude for the Coast Salish people, the stewards of the land on which we work and play, and encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and express gratitude for those that have stewarded and continue to steward the land that you live on as well. Many blessings and much love.